Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today will be Willy Daunic of 102.5 The Game. He, of course, played baseball and basketball at Vanderbilt. We thank our sponsor, WellSpire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. WellSpire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop in for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We also thank our co-presenting sponsor, the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. Our news presented by Sutherland & Belk, a Nashville-based injury law firm. Sutherland & Belk is committed to fighting for those who've been injured in car, motorcycle, and truck accidents. Check them out at sbinjurylaw.com. Vanderbilt will sell beer at Vanderbilt Stadium in 2018. That is a new policy. The SEC has given the go-ahead for that, and Vanderbilt has made the decision to follow along. Today's guest line is presented by Boll & Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on Boll & Branch sheets for about 6 years now. I have not gone to anything else since I started sleeping on them. Had no clue how much I could like sheets and how comfortable a night's sleep could be until I got Boll & Branch sheets. They are fair trade certified. That means they're made under safe conditions by men and women treated and paid fairly. Try them for a month. You can return them for free, but you'll not want to. Once you get the sheets, try the mattress. That was voted best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That is spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy. Get $50 off your first set of sheets. Willy Daunic is our guest. He is a longtime Nashville radio personality. He, of course, is the TV voice of the Nashville Predators. He's also part of Darren, Daunic, and Chase on Nashville's 102.5 The Game, which airs 10 to 2 every day. Willy, thank you for joining us today.
Chris, great to talk to you again.
Lots to cover. Let's start with baseball. There's so much to say about the season, but the thing that has amazed me is the success is one thing, but you know how that program was. Dozens of fans coming to watch games, no infrastructure, no support, no cool factor at all. It's not just the national titles, but to see where their brand has gone, where I think they are far and away the it program nationally, just blows my mind. And I can't imagine how it is for you, someone who played baseball there, to watch that.
Well, Chris, you hit the nail on the head talking about dozens of fans. I love telling stories to the current people who go to the games all the time, some of the current players who would have no idea what the field looked like before Hawkins Field was built, because it was on the same site. And they kind of look at me very crazy when I describe some of the things that were going on. So when you say dozens of fans, outside of the family and maybe friends who were students, there were a very, very small group of people that would regularly come to Vanderbilt baseball games. And what's great is a lot of those same fans still come today. And so I really feel good for them as well as everybody else when I see all the success that they're having.
What is so funny is a Vanderbilt fan, it was like having the plague if you grew up in Nashville and you got laughed at. The weird thing to me is seeing them be the cool team. I mean, their Twitter account has got, 130-something thousand followers. It is the program that all the kids want to play for these days, and that's just the thing that transcends winning, is how they have just become such a fashionable entity in the sports world.
That's a great point. When I was playing, this was the early 1990s, 90 through 93 were my years. We had some good players. We were competitive, and the league had the national champion in 3 out of the 4 years that I played. LSU won it twice, and Georgia won it once. And we hung in there with a lot of those teams, but our depth was such that we could never really break through. But we were nowhere close to having the type of program they have now. And all this to say, we had the worst facility by far in the league. The other teams in the league, now LSU and Mississippi State at that time are way ahead of everybody else with their ballpark atmosphere, but just about everybody else had gone down the road of building a really good baseball facility. So some of the things that my coach, Roy Newbern, was dealing with were really handicapping. And you're right, it was kind of the laughingstock. So it is so interesting to hear not only people acknowledge how great Vanderbilt's doing, but also to the point where they're jabbing at them and they're saying maybe they have some unfair advantages here and there. And, there's some envy going on. But that is completely a 180 of where it was before. So it does kind of make you chuckle if you can go back that far.
Willie, we've got about 20 minutes remaining today because you've got a show this morning, and I want to respect your time. But let's talk football for a minute. This is a program where there's starting to be a little bit of a buzz around it with the Big Three, with some increased success. I know that Derek Mason has not had a winning season, but going 6-7 compared to where Vanderbilt has historically been is somewhat of an accomplishment. Just speak to your outlook for this season and where you think the football program is.
I think that there's a lot of changed expectations amongst the Vanderbilt fans, and that is due to the success of both Derek Mason and James Franklin in the last decade or so. And I do think it's funny, too, and I'll tell you this, I think last year was one of the first times I, as a Vanderbilt football follower and coverer, whatever you want to define me as, alumni, radio host, etc., kind of had the feeling that 6-7, which would have been celebrated as one of the greatest seasons ever 10 or 15 years ago, was a little bit at the point where you're thinking maybe they should have won another game or two. They had so many opportunities to win some close games. There was some frustration at several points during the season last year. And so that's a new thing. So and to me, that's a positive because that shows you how far they've come along in terms of what expectations are, the talent level, and what can be accomplished there.
I'm going to go right into our mailbag, which is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. If you're in the market for auto, motorcycle, home, renters, or landlord insurance, or even life or commercial insurance, call Josh at 615-933-1979. You may email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook. That is facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He's my insurance agent. Hope you will make him yours as well. And give him a shout. He needs some help for Camp Horizon. That is a camp for kids with cancer that he helps put on. Josh is looking for sponsors, so I hope that some of you will reach out to him and ask there. Let's start with basketball. And the backdrop for this question, Willie, of course, you played basketball and baseball at Vanderbilt. And one of the criticisms I heard about Bryce Drew is he just did not have much networking going on with former players. I know Kevin Stallings was not the most personable guy to a lot of people. So I think there's been a hunger that I have sensed for former basketball players to connect with the coach and feel like they're part of a program. There was a little bit of a thing on Twitter this week with the former player and Jerry Stackhouse with a little maybe back and forth. And so I think that is the backdrop for this question from View Superior, which says, do you plan to reach out to Coach Jerry Stackhouse being a former player?
Well, the position I'm in on Sports Talk Radio a lot of times has allowed me to, have run-ins and not run-ins, but, the ability, the opportunities to meet and talk to all coaches in the area and especially the Vanderbilt coaches. I can just tell you my experiences with Bryce Drew as a former player were outstanding, not just my role in the media, but there were many times when he got there where we were invited to come out to practice. He was always telling us anytime he wanted to come over, we were welcome. So I can only speak for myself there, but I thought he was very accessible to me and a lot of the group that I played with that lives in this area. But it is something that you have to work at, I think, to network with the former players. I do think it's important to have an open door and to try to keep that connection going with players that were in the program. But I don't think that's unique to Vanderbilt basketball at all. I think that's pretty much every program has that challenge, and different coaches handle it and prioritize it in different ways.
I feel a little bad for Bryce. I think that he handled the situation with Garland really poorly, and I don't think that reality ever kicked in with him, that he should have done some things differently. And I think all the criticisms there are fair. Personally, though, as just a one-on-one guy, in terms of being likable. I really liked Bryce. Just a human being, I hated to see it go badly for him. I think the thing with Bryce was if you got some time with him one-on-one, you really liked the guy. I just think, and to some extent, Kevin Stallings was the same way, although their personalities were completely different. He was a very likable guy. I just think he was sort of shy into himself, and I don't think that he made maybe a lot of effort other than maybe what was right in front of him. Is that a fair way to characterize him?
Yeah, I think it takes a staff, really. I think you have to delegate some of that stuff. You have to have somebody that sets things up for you, that is proactive in that area. I think the media is one area, and former players, fan relations, connecting yourself in your surroundings is almost like a full-time job. And of course, there's plenty of other things that a coach has to worry about, coaching your team and recruiting and all of that stuff. That's why, to me, it's so intriguing, just the number of people on the staff for Jerry Stackhouse. So he's got plenty of manpower and woman power to look at these areas and maybe specialize in some. But I think, your description of Bryce Drew is an interesting one. I do think if you look at his profile and when he gets another chance to coach, which I think he will, I think if you wanted to say one thing in a nutshell, maybe he's a little too nice. Right, he's such a positive guy. Maybe you need a little bit more of that disciplinarian, that fiery guy on your staff to balance that out a little bit, because you need to find. I think a good staff has different personalities to try to push the right buttons within a team, because I do think he can learn from this experience. Regardless of how you feel with Bryce Drew, he did get dealt a really tough blow. I often wonder. We brought this up on our talk show over the summer, in 10 or 15 years, I don't know if Darius Garland is still going to be playing in the NBA. He's going to have a great opportunity, but it is always going to have the question to any Vanderbilt fan, what would the record have been had he played the full season, his one season in Vanderbilt history? They've never had a guy like that who was a lottery pick, that kind of ballyhooed guy coming into the program, a one and done. I'm curious what it would look like, but we'll never know.
Yeah, I hated for him that it happened the way it did, and I agree with you that, who knows, it might have been different, but it is what it is. I want to ask you, and I get asked about this a lot. My answer is always the same. I just don't know, and that's not good, that's not bad, but that's regarding Jerry Stackhouse, in my opinion. It's such an out-of-the-box hire. It comes at a time where the league's coaching is the best that I ever remember. You got guys who've been to Final Fours and won national titles and done all sorts of things. What is your outlook for Jerry Stackhouse at Vanderbilt? What's your impression of him so far?
I do think you hit on the dynamic, unknown, because it is a model that has never been used at Vanderbilt. I think some of his outside-the-box ideas are really intriguing. But I think that there is going to be a big learning curve for him in how a college program works, because he's so far removed from it. And, he's got a deep staff, as we've talked about. I think it's one of the more intriguing things. I think their staff, I don't know if anybody in the country's got more people on the staff than he does. So he's got a variety of different perspectives on there, which is what he was looking for. But when you have that many people, what does the culture end up being like? But I do think he's going to, one way or another, have to draw back to some of his days as a college player, which was a long time ago, and start putting that infrastructure in of what a good environment looks like for a college basketball team. I think it's great to want to develop players and develop pro players and find, some of those, tremendous talents coming in that do desire to play pro basketball. That's great. But to have a great college basketball team at Vanderbilt, you've got to have that element in there and covered as well. You've got to value going to school, and you're going to have to make your way with some good college basketball players. You're not going to have you're not going to have a roster full of 12 players that go on to play pro ball. It's probably not realistic.
Woody VU66 asks, I feel like Jerry Stackhouse is a good coach. There are two really good players in Saban Lee and Aaron Neesmith to build a team around, and one with a lot of potential. and he says that's Ejike Obinna. He says, I feel like 3 good players are enough to build a decent to good team around if the other guys fulfill their roles. Do you feel the same way, or is this Vandy basketball team in dire straits like most people think?
I think realistically, the expectation should be low in the first year. But that is going to be, I think, a great first test for Jerry Stackhouse to learn what it's going to take to win, other than just the obvious, and that's to build a roster and have a deeper roster of talent. The 3 players he mentioned, all to me are very intriguing players that bring a lot to the table. But those 3 alone, are they going to carry them to winning a lot of games in the league, as competitive as the league has been? I think that's a stretch. But I think what you're looking to do is put the pieces back together and try to build a foundation that you can grow out of, or that you can grow with. I think that is going to be a lot more important than the 1-loss record. But you would hope that you could have some success in there to build some confidence and make it an environment that people want to come and watch, and also make an environment that obviously people around the country notice and want to come play at.
2 things stand out to me when I read the question. The premise that I might question a little bit, I think that Nesmith will be a superstar potentially. Maybe it's this year, maybe it's next year. I mean, he could be good enough to be a superstar now, but when you don't have a surrounding cast, which I think is an issue, that affects what you can do. I think Saban Lee is potentially a good player. I just don't think that the role he's going to have to play for what looks like the 3rd straight year, assuming he's the point, is one where he fits best. And the Obinna thing, I mean, who knows? I think that both staffs have liked him to some degree, but I question what competition he sees in practice, and therefore, how do we really know? So that's one part. The other part is, and the injury thing to Garland, going back to that a minute ago, I am doing some editing for Chris Dortch at Blue Ribbon. I'm reading stories across the country. It is unbelievable how often a story starts with, well, the season was going one way for a team last year, and then 2 or 3 key players got hurt. And sometimes teams figured out, sometimes didn't. My point is, injuries are very prevalent throughout college basketball. And my concern is they may be starting with 9 guys to begin with if they don't have the Dessou kid, who Stackhouse told me they're waiting to see how he responds from an injury. He may not play. That gives them 9 potentially on scholarship. 3 of those guys would be freshmen. So there's the dynamic of, I don't know that that's a foundation of a great 3 players to begin with. Maybe it is, but their margin for error is already razor thin, and the season is 2 months away from starting, or 3 months, I guess.
Well, I can't imagine that there's going to be any kind of predicting them to do much in the league this year, and that to me is not the most important thing for Jerry Stackhouse. He inherited what he inherited. You cannot expect to go 0-18 and all of a sudden, bounce back and have a team that is, predicted anyway to go to the NCAA tournament or get back to the expectation level that I think everybody has that follows the program. Your goal is to try to build your way back into it, and it may take some time. But I do want to say, like, as you pointed out, I think Aaron Nesmith is outstanding. I really admired in the situation that they were in last year. I thought he stood out amongst everybody as a guy that really gave everything he had every night and competed. And obviously he's a great talent. So I think he's going places. I think he's going to be an excellent player. Obinna, to me, is a big mystery. I do. You watch him play, and you think to yourself, and I think some people would agree, NBA kind of body, right? Long arms, can really jump, can do a lot of things. But I want to see what it looks like when he's actually in live action now, a couple years removed from doing it. Can all of a sudden he become an impact player? That's a huge X factor, but that's not something that you can sit there and say, what you have there.
Vandy Doors 04 says, what do you think Vanderbilt has done well since Malcolm Turner's hire in expanding the athletic program's exposure in Nashville? What would you like to see the program do to increase the exposure?
Well, Malcolm Turner, I've met him just a couple of times, and I like I've enjoyed talking to him. What I have noticed is that it looks to me like besides really going to the greatest lengths he can to give Jerry Stackhouse everything he's asked for, to try to build his program. I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? That's his hire. He stood out, he went outside the box to hire Jerry Stackhouse, and I think he's really made a great effort to try to give him resources, which, as you know, Chris, has been questioned many times by Vanderbilt fans is, hey, provide the coaches with what they need. And so he's doing that with basketball for sure. I also see him making a lot of efforts to try to address the facilities, particularly in football. But I think it's stretched to basketball and baseball as well. I like the plan that they've laid out there. They're trying to do some things on game day for the football experience. We know they're trying to soup up the stadium some. The story came out yesterday that they begin selling alcohol in the stadium, which I think is progressive, and I think that's where everybody's going to end up in the next couple of years anyway. So I see what he's doing there, and that's just one element of what a good athletic director does. And so, time will tell on the other stuff, but I can see some of the things that he's tried to address early, and I think he's responding to what a lot of Vanderbilt fans have said need to be, these are the things that need to be addressed.
I think so much has been talked about since he's been here. Facilities have always been the big thing that's been at the forefront of the conversation for years now, going back to David Williams. I think the basketball thing, obviously he had to deal with that pretty quickly, and who knows, he may have another one to deal with next year on the women's side when they get to the spring. We'll see how that goes. But I think the most under-talked about part of his tenure that I'm watching is what can he do to build the fan base. I think that he's probably heard the stories. I think when he sees the Georgia game and walks in and it's probably 25,000 Georgia fans and 15,000 Vandy fans, and I know fans don't like to hear that, but it's the truth. I go to their baseball games sometimes and sit where the press box is in basketball games. It's behind the chairback seats. And I look at that fan base, Willie, and a lot of it is just old. So not only do you have the challenge of growing the fan base, but a lot of those people 5-10 years from now may not even be around. And I guess where I'm a little bit encouraged, if I'm them, is looking at the baseball and the Twitter following and how popular that is with the kids. That points to me that there's opportunity. I think the biggest challenge he has that is not being talked about is building that fan base back to a decent number of fans, because honestly, until you can get enough of your fans in the seats and interested enough and invested at that level, the football takeover is going to continue to happen, I think, at Vanderbilt when other fans come to Nashville and too often outnumber Vanderbilt's in their own house.
It's funny, we could go on for a couple hours on this, Chris, because you and I have talked about this for years, but I would just give you a little historical perspective. When I first started doing sports talk in the 90s in Nashville, this would have been, let's just pick a year, 1995, 96, 97. And I don't think it's an inaccurate statement what you're saying, that the general Vanderbilt fan tends to be on the older side. But what's funny is a generation ago, 20 years ago, they were saying the same thing about Vanderbilt fans. They're old. So I don't know what that really means, but I don't think it's an inaccurate thing to say. And so all that to say, you're right. Malcolm Turner is going to have to work extremely hard to build the fan base. But I would also say that relative to what we're seeing in all of the SEC stadiums, it's all relative, right? Everybody in this day and age is having trouble, other than maybe Alabama or Georgia that right now is at the peak and winning. But take a middle-of-the-road SEC team, I think I would show you a program that's having trouble filling the seats. Knoxville is having the same issue. You look around, if you were drawing 75% capacity, Florida Gators is a good example right now. They got a huge stadium. It's not easy to fill it like it used to be. People love staying home and watching the games. They're not traveling to the road games as often as they were. It's just sort of a changing time. So meeting those challenges as things evolve is something that everybody has, but definitely at Vanderbilt, because you don't have as many fans to draw from to begin with. And so it does take a lot of effort there. But let me also say this, Chris, for Malcolm Turner. When you're an athletic director, developing the fan base and developing the facilities, that's huge. Those have been huge needs for Vanderbilt. But remember, too, any athletic director also has to have the foundation of, and this is probably even more important than those, crazy as it sounds, but the relationships you build with your coaches and with the student athletes there, the bonds that you build, the support system that you have, that's got to stay intact. And I think that's where he's going to have to make sure, because of his, he doesn't have experience in that area. He's got to prove that he can do that as well while he addresses these other big things that he was sort of brought in to do.
Two things in response before I let you go. That's an interesting point about the fan base being old decades ago. And look, this is hardly the first time this has happened. I remember seeing Tennessee games in Nashville in the 90s where it was even worse than it is now in terms of fans being outnumbered. I think the 98 game, there might have been 5,000 Vandy fans in the building and everybody else was Tennessee. So this is not a new thing. I will also say one thing I almost forget about, because it almost seems like it never happened. It was such a different era ago. I remember going down to Birmingham in 2014, and the backdrop of that season was they had all the off the field distractions that year, and the team kind of started sluggishly, and then they ended up winning in Knoxville, winning 9 games. The fans had felt like they'd gotten shafted the year before in the bowl game, and they kind of got it again. A lot of people felt like a 9-win team or an 8-win team deserved a better bowl than Birmingham, but that's what they got. And I still remember going down there, and it is still one of the things that stands out in my head. How many people in Birmingham? I think Vanderbilt brought 35,000 fans, and they were excited to be there. So all that to say, it looks like they've got a lot of work to do, but I think there's more fans out there on the periphery based on that experience that they can draw from. And if I'm Malcolm Turner in Vanderbilt, I think that's where I draw some encouragement.
I agree with you on those bowl trips. I do think they made a great effort. I thought the Music City Bowl was a very good showing by the Vanderbilt fans in 2012. I went to the Liberty Bowl in 2011, and I thought they had an outstanding showing at that one as well. So I thought they were 3 for 3 in that area. And you're right, that does give you hope for sure that it can be better than it is. And also I would say this, I think Derek Mason has learned so much about what it takes to make the connection with your fans and make the connection in Nashville. His hustle is very admirable. I would use the case in point. You mentioned Birmingham for the bowl game. Well, in Birmingham, for SEC Media Days a couple of weeks ago, he came a day early. He went on every single radio show he could possibly go on. I was part of Radio Row there, and there were, I don't know, couple dozen radio stations there. I'll bet you he did 90% of them. And if he missed a couple, it was just because the timing didn't work. It wasn't because he, chose not to go on there. I think he has really come a long way in understanding, media relations and accessibility. So I think he's doing his part without a doubt.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Willie, wish we had more time, but you've got a show to do, and I've already rescheduled you from earlier in the week due to a practice conflict, so I appreciate you accommodating us. Tell folks about your show, where they can follow you on Twitter, anything else that you would like to promote.
All right, Chris. Well, first of all, I always enjoy coming on, so let's do this again. Subjects that we want to take further, I'm always up for it. Because as you know, when you do a sports talk show, you're talking about everything. And sometimes, you don't get to talk about certain subjects that you're really interested in as much as you like. In case in point, for my radio show, 102.5, if it was up to me and we were only talking about things I'd be interested in, we would talk a heck of a lot more baseball over the summer than we do. But that's just not where it's going. We're not a Major League Baseball town, at least not yet. Maybe in 20 years it'll be different. But I do the midday show on 102.5, the game, the ESPN radio here in Nashville, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on weekdays. And, of course, when October rolls around, I'll be doing the Predators games. This will be my 7th year doing play-by-play and traveling with the team. I'll be doing the games on Fox Sports Tennessee with, of course, Chris Mason and our entire crew So that'll be here before we know it. So school's starting up, and things are getting exciting in the Nashville sports landscape.
He is Willy Daunic of 102.5 The Game. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. We thank you for listening. We will have more episodes coming your way later in the week.